The Handley Page Victor's fiery Takeoff, Britain's jet bomber that flew with rockets. There are few sights in Cold War aviation as spectacular or as thunderous as the Handley Page Victor lighting up its RATO units. The moment those rockets ignited beneath its swept wings, the mighty Victor didn't just take off, it leapt into the sky like a silver spear launched by fire. Let's dive deep into the extraordinary story of how one of Britain's most elegant bombers took flight with the help of raw rocket power. The era of the V-bombers. During the tense years of the Cold War, Britain's nuclear deterrent rested on three legendary aircraft: the Vickers Valiant, the Avro Vulcan, and the Handley Page Victor, together known as the V-bombers. Each was designed to carry Britain's atomic weapons deep into Soviet territory, flying fast, high, and far enough to evade interception. But with massive payloads, limited early jet thrust, and short airbase runways, there was one problem: getting airborne in time. The solution? Strap rockets to the bomber. What is RATO? Rocket-assisted takeoff, sometimes called RATO, was a system designed to give heavy aircraft an extra boost of thrust during takeoff. For the Victor, this meant a cluster of small, solid-fuel rocket bottles mounted under the wings near the fuselage. When fired, they would burn for around 10 to 15 seconds, generating up to 8,000 pounds of extra thrust, enough to cut takeoff distance dramatically and get the fully loaded jet airborne safely. Each RATO unit would ignite in a perfect timed sequence, with the Victor's 4 Rolls-Royce Conway turbojets roaring at full power. The combined spectacle was unforgettable: flames, smoke, and thunder rolling across the runway as the bomber surged forward. How it worked on the Victor. The Victor's RATO system was beautifully integrated into its design. The RATO bottles were mounted under the wing roots in pairs, tucked neatly into streamlined pods. Activation. Once the throttles hit takeoff power, the pilot could trigger the RATO system manually or automatically at a set point. Duration. Each rocket burned for a brief, intense burst, just long enough to lift the aircraft off a short or wet runway. Ejection. After burnout, the RATO bottles were jettisoned automatically, parachuting down to be recovered and reused. This wasn't just brute force, it was engineering precision, helping the RAF's bomber force remain combat-ready in any environment. Why it was needed. In wartime planning, Britain expected that Soviet attacks could cripple its main air bases. The V-bombers might have to take off from damaged, short or rough runways, or even from temporary dispersal airstrips. A fully armed Victor could weigh over 150,000 pounds, a massive load for its slender delta wings. Under hot, high-altitude or wet conditions, the jet engines alone weren't enough to get her airborne safely. RATO meant life or death for both crew and mission. It allowed the Victor to take off under any conditions with full fuel and nuclear payload, even if the runway was barely long enough for a regional airliner. The power and the spectacle. A Victor RATO launch was an awe-inspiring sight. White-hot exhaust plumes erupted from beneath the wings. Smoke trails billowed behind the aircraft, rolling across the airfield like fog. The jet accelerated furiously, nose rising with impossible urgency. In seconds, the bomber was airborne, climbing steeply, leaving behind a trail of rocket smoke that lingered long after it vanished into the clouds. To those on the ground, it looked almost supernatural, a machine too heavy to fly, yet soaring thanks to the alchemy of fire and flight. Test pilot insights. Pilots who flew RATO-assisted Victors described it as a controlled explosion on your back. One RAF crewman said,
"You didn't just feel it, you experienced it. The entire airframe vibrated, the acceleration was phenomenal, and before you realized it, you were at 200 knots, climbing like a fighter."
Yet it wasn't without risk. The timing had to be perfect. A failed RATO ignition could cause asymmetric thrust and loss of control. Misfires or rocket malfunctions were rare, but unforgettable when they happened. RATO in service and legacy. While the Victor was equipped and tested with RATO, operational use was limited. The rockets were mainly intended for emergency takeoff scenarios and test programs, rather than daily missions. As Britain's runways improved and jet engines became more powerful, the need for RATO gradually faded. By the 1960s, the Victor transitioned from a strategic bomber into a tanker. Its RATO system retired, but its legend secured. Today, you can still see some of those RATO bottles preserved in museums, small metal cylinders that once gave the Victor its fiery wings. The Victor's spirit. The Handley Page. Victor remains one of the most distinctive aircraft ever built, a sleek crescent-winged marvel that symbolized the height of British aeronautical ambition. Its RATO system wasn't just a tool, it was a symbol of Cold War urgency, of Britain's determination to stay one step ahead in an age when seconds could decide the fate of nations. When those rockets fired, it wasn't just a takeoff, it was a statement. Britain's V-force was ready for anything. Final thought. Today, we can only imagine the sound, the smell, the power of that moment when the Victor's rockets ignited. It was a time when engineering dared to meet the impossible, when men and machines embraced the fire of innovation to defend their skies. The Victor's RATO takeoff remains one of aviation's most spectacular dances of power and precision.